You're listening to Birthing at Home, a podcast. I'm Elsie, your host. I recorded this episode on unceded Wurundjeri land in Naarm, Melbourne, Australia, where Aboriginal peoples had been birthing at home, on country, for thousands of years prior to the British invasion. They are the original storytellers. If you want to learn more about me, the podcast, or how I can support you in achieving your home birth, be sure to check out my Instagram at birthingathome_a-podcast. Episode 34 is the freebirth story of Lakai, a story from Mel, who shared her first story with us on episode 11. Mel is a Wurundjeri woman from Newcastle, and if you want to hear her first home birth story, check out episode 11. Today, we will only hear the recent unassisted birth story of Lakai, how Mel prepared, enjoyed her wild pregnancy where she lent into listening to her intuition, and then her experience of a normal, boring birth. Mel also shares about her hospital transfer for a third-degree tear. It's a great episode for anyone planning to birth at home. Enjoy. Welcome, Mel, to Birthing at Home, a podcast again.
Hi, Elsie. Thank you for having me.
Again.
I know.
I'm so excited to talk to you today. For the listeners who haven't listened yet, Mel was in episode 11 and she shared the birth story of her first baby, Alaska. But for the listeners that, haven't heard that story and don't know your background and whatnot, Mel, do you want to give like a little overview about who you are, who's in your family?
Sure. So I'm Mel. I'm a mama of two little ones now. I've got a 2.5-year-old Alaska who I home birthed back in 2021. And then I've just given birth 5 weeks ago to a little boy named Lakai, who was also born at home.
Yeah.
Oh, and I have a husband. Sorry. I live with my husband, Jesse, as well.
Yeah, amazing. We just discussed this, listeners. So maybe, Mel, do you want to give like a little overview of, I guess, maybe, if you want to hear about Alaska's birth, you need to go listen to episode 11. But maybe, do you want to sort of reflect, Mel, on, how you felt after Alaska's birth? And because with Alaska, you had midwives, right?
Yeah. So I had a private midwife for Alaska.
Yeah.
Who I was very fortunate was one of the rare ones that truly supported women. There was really no conditions to my care.
Yeah.
So, I was I was supported to go to, past my due date and, didn't have to do standardized testing and things like that. So I thought I had an amazing birth in Alaska until I had this birth, and I can really compare the two now.
Yeah.
I've been fortunate to have two really beautiful, very different births.
Yeah. Yeah. And were there like particular reasons that you're comfortable to share why you decided to just, birth without, a healthcare provider like a midwife this time around?
Yeah. So my first midwife had been deregistered when he's no longer practicing as a home birth midwife. So that option was sort of gone. And when I fell pregnant and I looked at the options in my area, there was no one that I truly aligned with, that I, felt like I'd like to invest money in. And once I was pregnant, I just had this innate calling to free birth. Like I didn't feel like I needed to go, I needed to have a midwife, or I didn't feel the need to go and get tests or scans straight away. So it was a completely different experience. So I just lent into that, I think. And I sort of like spoke it over with my husband and said, look, this is what I'm thinking. I think I might just want to have a birth keeper or a doula. And then maybe like early in my first trimester, we just said, okay, let's look for a doula or a birth keeper or someone to support us in that space.
Yeah.
So yeah, it just really felt like the right path for me at the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. What was the process to, choosing a doula or a birth keeper that would support like a free birth? Because I know it's like a very controversial issue about free birth, and who supports it, who doesn't, blah blah blah. But like, what was that process like for you?
Yeah, so I'm actually in Newcastle, which is a really good community of home birthers and free birthers. But the surprising thing was that all of the doulas that I knew supported free births were all having babies, or they were like postpartum themselves.
Yeah.
So I actually found it quite hard. I was really only looking for a birth worker that had worked in the free birth space. I didn't want, there's some amazing doulas that do a mix of hospital and home birth, but I didn't want I suppose maybe their fears or things that they've experienced in hospital births to come into my space. I ended up looking on the Central Coast, which I'm pretty much halfway between Newcastle and the Central Coast anyway, and I found a couple. And I met with two, and I just didn't feel 100% like a full body yes. And then I spoke to the woman that I actually ended up choosing on the phone. And when I went to meet with her, I literally seen her walking across the car park, and I was like, she's it. That's my person.
Wow.
And it was just, I don't know if anyone else has had that experience, but it was like my whole body was like, this is my doula.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was very fortunate to find Jenna, who is my birth keeper. And she supported me a lot, really mainly in pre-birth. Like, we did a lot of sessions around like rite of passage work and a lot of mental prep around, shedding the maid in me and meeting the intensity of birth and coming out the other side as a new mum. And I think that really played a role in my mindset going into this birth. So that was a lot of the work we did. She also did a mother's blessing for me, which was like so weird for me because I've always been like, when she first mentioned it, I was like, oh, like people coming together to celebrate me, like yuck.
All the attention.
Yeah. And she really was like, it's like a really important journey, and I think you should consider it. And I finally did, and it was amazing.
Yeah, it looks so beautiful. I remember seeing a picture, like, I don't know where, on one of your Instagrams, and I'm so jealous.
Yeah.
That's such a special experience. What kind of stuff, like, did you do at the Mother Blessing? Like,
yeah, so we what did we do? So I got like a foot soak.
Yeah.
I had pretty much anyone that was really important to me. I got like my feet rubbed. I got my hair, like my head massaged. All the women in the circle, they all had like bunting flags, and they all drew on them to go up in my birth space. Yeah. They all brought like a crystal as well to go onto like a birthing necklace for me. Yeah, there was a lot. And then the really beautiful thing was they all went around and sort of said, like, I can't remember what the question was, but like they gave me, I think it was just wise words for going into my next journey. And it was women that were in the space, and they were being really vulnerable, and they were saying like, oh, like you really inspire me. And, that day when I watched you with your daughter, that sparked something with me in my own parenting journey. And I was like getting so emotional. Just, you never have this time and the space to sit down and hear that from people.
Yeah.
And there was so many tears, just like people being so vulnerable. It was just, it was really beautiful.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. We also all like connected via a red thread, and everyone tied it off, and then I wore it in my birth, and then once I'd given birth, everyone cut theirs.
Oh, wow.
So we're all like connected, and I had the strength of them during my birth. So yeah, it's if anyone's considering it, I highly recommend. Like it's a really beautiful like thing to be blessed with before you go into labor land.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so special. And I think something about the energy. When I had Murphy, I also had like a mother blessing, but I don't know if any of the people that were there would listen to this, but it just felt like I was the same as you. I was like, oh my gosh, actually, like all of this attention. But they also, I guess birth often, you know, in our sort of broader Australian culture, like lacks that spiritualness, you know, and like I think that's so special that like you cut the cord and they cut like the red thread. And wow. Did your doula, do you call her a doula or a birth keeper?
I call her a birth keeper. That's sort of what she goes by now.
Did you, like, obviously you said you worked on like rite of passage stuff and whatnot. Was there anything that you really had to work on to sort of overcome, especially, you know, off the back of like giving birth to Alaska and, you know, having experienced birth before?
The one thing that I suppose the only fear that I had going into my birth was that I would have another like 3 or 4 day labor.
Yeah.
Which I always said, like, I've done it before. I know, I can definitely do it again, but that was like my fear, like, oh, what if that happens? And, you know, I call them over and then it eases off. Or the other thing was we did a really cool activity with me and my husband, and she asked him what my maiden traits are that like I think I may need to shed like moving forward. And it was so interesting to hear him come up with some, and I came up with some. And one was that he was like, you're like a people pleaser, and like you always like bend over backwards for people. And especially in my end of pregnancy, I was doing things for people for free or like going out of my way, and I probably should have been like more in my own bubble and like, you know, taking care of myself more. And that was something I worked on, like saying no if I didn't have like a full body yes. That literally changed so many things for me, and I realized how much I actually did it. I started, and I just remember her saying like, now is your time to be selfish. If you're going to be selfish anytime, it's like when you're pregnant or when you're postpartum, that's your time. I embraced being selfish for the first time in my life, which was beautiful. And the one that I came up with was like judgment. I think as much as we want to say we don't judge, I feel like, and like innately we all have this like side of us where we can look at people and judge from the outside. So that was something I worked on as well, and just accepting that like other people's journey is not mine. But they were sort of the main things that we worked on, which really helped me.
And like, did you have a completely wild pregnancy as well?
So I didn't have bloods, or like any medical scans, like any diagnostic scans or growth scans. I didn't see a GP at all, actually. So,
oh my gosh, that sounds so freeing. I feel like my anxiety just went down.
And it just felt like, it's not that I was against that. Like if I ever felt, I think when I spoke to you, I was like, last time I was saying, I'll get bloods at 30 weeks. And I just never felt like I needed it. Like I never had that calling to go do that. Like if I felt unwell or I felt like I needed it, I definitely would have. Or if I felt like I needed a scan, I would have, but I just never did. So I just followed that, I think.
Yeah, wow. And what was it like then to feel the first movement or to, sit in that uncertainty of like, how many weeks am I? Or, how was that for you?
Yeah, I'm not saying that like, everyone that free births needs to go through this stage, but it is such an incredible feeling leaning into that complete unknown. And it's like really that's how you ignite the trust in your body. Just, from getting a pregnancy test to when you feel a movement, I think I felt movements really early, like maybe 12 weeks or something.
Yeah.
Until you feel that proper movements, it's like you're sitting in the unknown, but you just lean into it, right? And it was, I just can't explain it. It was just such an incredible feeling. And then, I'd be like feeling my belly and going, oh, I think they're really big. Or like, then towards the end, like you become a pro at knowing where your baby is.
Yeah.
Knowing if you did like certain activities that day, they'd, move into this position, or you really become the expert of your own body.
Yeah.
It's incredible journey.
Yeah. Yeah, wow. I'm just like, that's so cool. I forget what her Instagram handle is, but I remember speaking with, her name's Jessie. And when she told me about, not taking a pregnancy test and like feeling the first movements, I was like, wow, that is like so cool. 'Cause really that is like the first intervention. That's the first time that you have to use something, or that you don't have to, but you use something to like check yourself. And that, that act in itself might not be, the reason why you don't trust your body, but it certainly filters into it, I just think that's like so, so amazing. And was there any point during your pregnancy where you were, I guess, doubting your body or yourself, or you were tempted by a scan or a test or whatever else?
Yeah, not at all. I did have like really early on, I had conversations with my husband around, because I had birth before at 43 weeks.
Yeah.
And I was sort of thinking, is that my normal? Like I had a 3.6 kilo baby, so she wasn't big.
Yeah.
And I've had friends that have free birth at 35 or 36 weeks. So I had said to my husband, like, oh, if at like 35 or 36 weeks I went into labor, maybe I would go and see if I could get a scan and just check that baby is like at an appropriate size. Or like I had those thoughts like, oh, would I go to hospital, or what if I went to hospital and had a completely normal sized baby and then I've just like sabotaged my own birth?
Yeah.
But yeah, I had sort of those thoughts really early on, but as I progressed through, I knew that I wouldn't. Yeah. I think, I just gained that, like connection with my baby, and I knew that they'd come at the right time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was there anything in particular that helped with that trust in yourself in birth to, make it even stronger? Like obviously you like me, well, I hear birth stories and you read birth stories all the time with your Instagram, but, was there anything in particular? Did you like redo like any particular like education or stuff like that? Yeah,
I actually did sort of the opposite. So I stripped down everything I knew about birth. I was like, every story I've heard, every education, because I had previously done hypnobirthing and obviously a lot of self-education. And I just stripped down everything I knew, and I just strictly looked at physiology. I didn't want to have any outside conditioning. I just wanted to look at the basics of birth, really.
Yeah.
So I've really gravitated towards a lot of like Dr. Rachel Reed's stuff.
Yeah.
Obviously her book, Childbirth as a Rite of Passage, was great. A lot of like online articles by her and Dr. Sarah Wickham.
Yeah.
Which just look at the physiology of birth and the actual evidence, right?
Yeah.
I love that about Dr. Sarah Wickham, actually, is that like her background is maths and statistics, and then she's also this like incredibly educated midwife and, you know, PhD researcher. So her stuff is actually like highly regarded.
Yeah.
And I become a huge birth nerd at just like diving into all of that stuff that people probably think is really boring.
Yeah.
I also started to think towards the end of my pregnancy, I was like, oh, I haven't looked over like my hypnobirthing breathing or anything. And I sat with that for a little while, and I was like, I don't feel the need to. I just had this, thing internally where I was like, am I going to get into birth and forget how to breathe and freak out that I haven't trained to breathe? Like, that was one side of my brain. And then the other side was like, no, like, you don't need to do that.
Yeah.
And I didn't. And I did find with my first birth, I was focusing too much on how many breaths I had to take for this like hypnobirthing method, that I almost got into this like fixation with it and would freak out if I wasn't breathing correctly, where I did not even think about it this time, and my body just did it. My body just breathed exactly in different stages of my labor. It just kicked in how I needed to breathe. Innately, without even thinking about it or, you know, knowing I was doing it. A lot of self-education, but primarily just on the physiology. I tried not to look anything outside of that. And although I was like reading a lot of birth stories, in my first pregnancy, I listened to like every birth story I could. This time I didn't feel called to that either. I was sort of just like not wanting other people's experiences to, you know, make me envision some type of birth that wasn't mine. So, that's sort of what I did this time around.
Yeah. And telling like your loved ones or, you know, even friends perhaps, like that you were going to birth without a midwife. Like, I think that's awesome, obviously, but how did friends and family react?
I think now all of my friends are literally from the birth community. I've got like maybe 3 long-term friends that are quite aligned with me, or they just know what I'm like. Like they I suppose trust my decision making. But all the rest are all in the birth community that either home birth or free birth themselves. So in that aspect, it was fine. Even my family are the same, quite aligned. I told my mum, I just said, I'm just going to have a doula, and I just didn't really get into what that meant. And then about halfway through my pregnancy, she said, "You're not having midwife, are you?" And I was like, "No." And she goes, "Oh, okay." And that was amazing. The whole conversation.
Wow.
And, you know, I've had conversations with her after that where we've spoken about, you know, birth and hospitals, and she gets in the whole conversation with me about obstetricians, and she's fully on board now, which is so funny. But no, this time, no. I think, you know, some people, I had a client that was asking me a lot of questions, and I just was saying, I'm just birthing at home the same. And then she was asking who my midwife was, and I was like, I don't know yet. I'm still deciding. So I was trying to be really broad, but then I was getting like specific questions, and I didn't want to lie. So I was just a bit like laxy-daisy about it. But everyone else knew. And then everyone that came to my mother's blessing knew, so we could openly talk about my birth, which was really cool.
Did you go into labour or birth thinking, you know, obviously we talked about the breathing, but like in terms of any, equipment sounds very like sciencey and, you know, very white room, but like, I don't know, was there any like equipment that you wanted to use that was different to Alaska's? Like, for example, me, I really wish I had used a birth comb. I really want to know what it's like to use a birth comb. Did you have anything like that?
Yeah, so there was a few things I did. I have a beautiful friend that is a doula in Sydney, and she has like the coolest little doula kits. So she had like birth combs, and she had this thing called the birth weapon, which is essentially like a spiky wooden ball.
Yeah.
And also a friend lent me the L10s machine, which in my first birth, I just had an Aldi 10s machine. And can I just say for the record, if you are going into birth, do not get an Aldi 10s machine. They are great for like muscle pain. They are not great for birth.
Yeah.
The L10s machine was actually like the best thing I think I have ever witnessed.
Wow.
To the point where I knew I needed, in my labor, I knew I needed to get in the water. I was like, need to get that relief. But also I was terrified of taking my TENS pads off because they were just like the best thing ever.
Yeah.
So I did use all of them. The birth comb and the birth weapons, but I actually didn't use the birth comb and that until I was literally like nearly pushing. I was already in the water.
Yeah.
But yeah, the TENS machine, definitely a goer.
Yeah. I'm so excited then. Do you want to walk us through like the lead up to labor and birth then?
Yeah. So I've always been like that person, like just wait for labor, like don't stress about it. And I sort of thought, I'm going to go to 42 weeks. I know you should never put numbers on it. And I was like, 42 weeks probably. Like, no way I would go over that, like, again. And so I was positive, so great, until I got to like 42 and 1. And I was like, I'm over being pregnant. And I started getting in that like negative Nancy, mainly because I actually had an incredible pregnancy. I was like I didn't even feel pregnant, but just the not knowing, like not planning things, or like my husband would go to work and be like, should I like extend my leave again? Cause like I didn't want him to take leave when I didn't have a baby. Yeah. Just like that unknown. But I just was just like keeping busy and moving a lot. So the day before I went into labor, I, woke up in the morning and I was like, I'm going to go do some shopping for my daughter. And I was childless and it was really amazing. And then I went straight to prenatal yoga, which was like an hour and a half. And I did this yoga session and I was like, oh my gosh, this was the best thing ever. And I just felt this whole body release. Yeah. Like I just felt really ready. And then there was a show on. So I went and picked up my husband and my daughter and we went to this local show, and I think I walked around for like 5 hours. We got home at like 10 p.m. at night. So I had a really big day. And the next morning I woke up and I was still like just had the same cramps that I'd had for like a month. I'd had like real achy period type cramps, but nothing had really progressed. Yeah. And I started painting with my daughter, and my birth keeper texted me and she just checked in on me for the week, and I was like, yep, still got the same things. Nothing's changed. No different sensations. And within like 5 minutes of sending that message, I wrote back, actually, I think something might be different today. And then like 10 minutes later, something's definitely happening. Wow. And looking back at my messages with her, it was so funny, my timing. Like I kept thinking I had lots of time when intuitively I knew that I was very close. Yeah, wow. So I just started feeling like the cramps were becoming more consistent, and then they weren't going away. Usually, like by the time I get out and about and do stuff, they ease off, and they weren't doing that. So I was like packing up with my toddler. She was like running around with pain all over her. I had pain on me, and I started getting like really intense cramps. Yeah. And I was like, this is like, I'm getting irritated. I was in the like irritated stage. Yeah. And I was like, maybe I'm in pre-labor. And so I made a big batch of labor aid. I set up my birth space because like having a toddler, I couldn't really do that until the day off.
Yeah.
So I did that, and my husband just blew up the pool, and she was like fixated on it. She was jumping off my furniture doing front flips into the empty birth pool, and she had all her toys in there. It was so funny.
Yeah.
And that was probably like midday, and then by 1:00, I was like, I'm just going to rest and watch a movie, and try and get as much rest as possible. And I ended up on the birth ball, and then I was like, oh, I feel like I need to get my TENS machine on, because it was getting like quite intense.
Yeah.
So yeah, I did that, and I was sort of unbothered. Like, I didn't really notice my daughter around me, to be honest, but my husband, I think, was stressing more. He was like seeing her like jump on me and like jump in the birth pool, and he was like, oh, I'm going to take her out for the afternoon. And I was like, oh, okay. And once they left, it like really ramped up.
Wow.
In my labour with Alaska, I laboured for the overnights all by myself, and I loved it. And same here, I laboured most of my birth by myself, and it was just incredible. I pretty much, once they left, I got my headphones in, I had my TENS machine on, and I was like feeling like I just needed to move through each contraction. So I was like dancing through them, like swaying my hips, and it just really helped. I felt like if I got one and I wasn't prepared, like I was just sitting on the birth ball and I hadn't stood up and moved yet, I was like, they were really overwhelming.
Yeah.
But if I was just moving through them and I had like a really upbeat song on, it just was like, it just flowed really well.
Yeah.
I felt quite quickly that I needed a change of scenery, so I went out onto my back deck and I laboured in the sun for a while, and it was like a 30-degree day. So after like an hour of that, I was like, whew. And my doula, birth keeper, checked in, and she was like, what, do you want me to come? And here I am, like, thinking I could still have like 3 days. So I'm like, no, like, I feel fine. I'll call you when I like really feel like I need someone.
Yeah.
And my husband was like, do you want me to come home? And I was like, no. And then within like 10 minutes, I text her and said, can you come now? Because she was an hour and a half away as well. And I called my husband and I was like, I need you to get ice. I need you to get Alaska's bag ready and send her to my brother's.
Yeah.
And that's like all I said.
Yeah.
I was like, that was my last like thinking brain. I like was like, this is my direction. I just need that.
Yeah.
And he got home maybe 10 minutes later, and I was in the shower on all fours, and I was like roaring.
Wow.
And I heard like him get my daughter out the door, and she got picked up, and I was like, birth pool filled up now. Like, I just need it now. And I was like in the shower, and I was like, oh shit, am I getting in the birth pool too early? I just wasn't sure. Like, looking back, I was so progressed in labor, but I just always had that in the back of my mind, like, oh, is it too early? The other thing I didn't say was, weeks before, maybe like 2 or 3 weeks before, I'd lost like a lot of my mucus plug.
Okay, yep.
And it was like one of those things where you're like, oh, it could mean labor's 3 hours away, or it could mean it's like 3 weeks away.
Yeah.
But coming up to this labor, I hadn't lost my mucus plug. My waters didn't break until baby was coming out. So I was still feeling like I hadn't had these things happen.
Yeah.
So it could be ages.
Yeah.
But yeah, I remember like hobbling from the shower down. I've got like 3 little steps in my house, and then into the birth pool in the lounge room. And I got in, and it probably had like no water in it. Like, he just had the hose. I think he'd been filling up for like 3 minutes.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, it's still cold. And I was like, I'm getting in.
Yeah.
And I just got in and started laboring in there, and it just went so quick.
Yeah, really.
At that point was when I was in the shower and when I moved to the birth pool, I was in transition now that I look back on it.
Yeah.
But at the time, I was just thinking like, oh, this is really intense, but I'm going to meet this intensity.
Yeah.
And I'm going to like welcome it.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to fear the next contraction, because I know that this actually means my baby's really close.
Yeah.
And so that was my mindset. And one of my beautiful friends, she makes affirmation cards, and she gave me a set on, and one of the cards, it had her like riding a bike up a hill.
Yeah.
And it said something like, I just need to reach the peak and then I get the downhill run.
Yeah.
And I always had that in my head as well. It's like the contraction's actually only really intense for like 10 seconds.
Yeah.
It's like you go up and then you hit the peak and then you can come back down. And so I always visualize that as well. So I got in the birth pool, and the one thing that I like crave in labor is icy cold water, like ran over my head and my back.
Okay, yeah.
So hubby had got the ice. He was just putting like the washers in the ice and pouring it over me. And then I asked for the birth combs. And I started my labor, like I wouldn't say it was pain-free. It was super intense, but it was like enjoyable.
Okay.
I just had like this ecstatic feeling. I can't explain it. Like it was, I was just like smiling and like laughing through it. It was so, so intense. But every time I got that wave of holy shit, I would just go, I'm going to meet them. Like I'm doing this. I'm so close. Yeah. And you know, there's videos that I'm saying, oh my, like they're coming. I'm doing it. I'm so close. I'm going to meet them.
Wow.
Yeah, it was just so cool. And by the time my birth keeper got there, I remember her walking in the door, and my birth pool was like at the front door. Yeah. And just perfectly, she just slotted in. No one exchanged words.
Wow.
She just picked up a washer and took over what Jessie was doing.
Whoa.
And it was only 5 minutes after she arrived and I'd come out of a contraction that I was like, oh, like Jenna. And I started interacting with her. And yeah, they both just did that. I think she was putting them on my head. He was running them over my back. And I felt that transition from the front contractions to that bearing down feeling. Yeah. And I was saying throughout my labor, I was like communicating with them what was happening. So I was like, oh yeah, I'm bearing down. Like I've just felt the pressure change. Yeah. And this time around, it was so different. So like with Alaska, I got that bearing down feeling and that pressure moved from my front to my back, and I laid down and it was enjoyable and I could relax. Okay. This time I got this like bear down feeling, and it was just like, baby is coming out. Like you're not relaxing. Like, and it felt, I went and seen Born at Home, the movie, the other night, and a lady described it perfectly, but she said, no one told me it felt like my sacrum was going to tear in half. And that is exactly what it felt like. Like it was just like this heavy, heavy feeling, no break, no rest. Yeah. I remember going, okay, this is my time to rest. I'm going to like put my head on the side of the birth pool, and I experienced the fetal ejection reflex in its full force. Whoa. Where the only way I can describe it is when I laid down, it felt like I had to do a projectile vomit and my whole body went like forward. Whoa. And I was trying to fight it. I was like, no, I'm resting. Yeah. And that wasn't happening. And it just was like this, rush. Baby was coming out. And I think my husband was like doing something with like the towels or water or something like that. And I like yelled out to him. And then I did post a video on my Instagram where I'm like, the head's out. And that was the part where I was like yelling out to him, and he came over to the birth pool and I was like, the head's out. Like it's already here. Yeah. Wow. And then I just sat for a little bit, and I could feel baby turning, and I was saying to them, oh, baby's just rotating. Yeah. Which is like the difference in my first birth. I was looking at someone else. I was looking at a midwife during transition to help me. And
Yeah.
I was looking at a midwife during the pushing stage to tell me what was happening, where this time I knew everything that was happening.
Yeah.
And I was telling the other people around me, which I thought was really cool, like just in full control the whole time.
Yeah.
And yeah, then baby just like shot out.
Yeah.
I really tried to slow it down, like as much as I could, and just breathe. And I was going, just soften, because I just felt the pressure was so intense.
Yeah.
And yeah, baby comes straight out. He was like crying straight away.
Wow.
He was pink. He was like a beautiful color.
Yeah.
And it was like so uneventful. Like when I think back on it, I just pulled him up, had him on my chest, and everyone was like quiet.
Yeah.
Like it was just like a normal, like, yeah, no, it's like you hear the term like normal, boring free birth. It was just like this normal, boring thing that just happened.
Yeah.
And even like my husband didn't come over to me straight away. Like in the video, they're all just like staring, and I just had baby like uninterrupted. And then after a little bit, his one job, which I told him, was like, when baby comes out, I need to make sure the aircon's off and you've got like a warm towel to put over us when I'm ready. And he was just standing in the corner with like a towel.
Oh my gosh, shocked.
So yeah, he come over with the towel, and then we all just like had a bit of a laugh about like what happened. And they both said to me like, oh my gosh, you're going to look over that video and say that looked so easy.
Yeah.
It was just such a surreal birth.
Yeah. So what time did you end up having him, roughly?
7:00.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was probably in like, from like proper contractions to baby out was 7 hours, but which felt so quick. Like when I hear people say they had a 2-hour labor, in labor land, it's so quick. Like time isn't a thing. So I think, wow, that would be intense.
Yeah.
That felt really quick for me.
Yeah.
And yeah, I asked for some labor aid, and my birth keeper got me some of that, and I just sat in the pool, and my husband came over and gave us a cuddle, and then my birth keeper, I asked for some no bleed tincture because I noticed with Alaska's birth, I didn't bleed like at all in the pool. Like the pool was like spotless.
Yeah.
This one I noticed like it was quite dark. So I think I was just more I was just more aware, like, because I'd done so much self-education, and you're taking your birth into your own hands. Like I was quite aware of things like that. Like I was not like I want to be a midwife, but I was like thinking, oh, like there's probably a lot of blood in this pool, so I might take a tincture now.
Yeah.
Like, so I did that. And then I asked to get out of the pool. It was just so cool because, like, I birthed him in the same spot that I birthed Alaska. And then, like, I got onto the same lounge and they had it all, like, the towels over the lounge, and I breastfed him in the same spot that I breastfed her. And it was just, one of those really cool things about home birth where I was getting, like, deja vu almost.
Yeah.
But yeah, I got on the lounge and I breastfed him, and he was just like, he was straight on the boob, like so easy. And he just sat and fed for ages. And I really hated birthing my placenta the first time. I felt like I was so exhausted and I'd not really prepared for it. Like, you know how people say now, like, you know, birth isn't over until the placenta's birthed. I didn't really know that in my first birth. So I was like ready to clock out. And then like an hour or so after birth, my midwife was like, oh, you know, the placenta's still a thing as well. And I hated that. I was just the feeling of it coming out, and I felt like it was such an effort. I hated it. So I really worked on that with my birth keeper this time. She does a lot. She works with placentas, like encapsulating them and stuff like that. And she did a lot of like visualization with me around like letting my placenta release and, you know, come away from my body and all that. So we did that. And it was like 20 minutes after birth. I was like, I think I need a poo. And I was like feeling really uncomfortable, and she knew. So she come with the placenta bowl.
Yeah.
And I like nearly got to the toilet and it just plopped out and she caught it.
Oh, she caught it.
Yeah, she like put the bowl like straight under me.
Yeah.
But I was like, no, it's definitely a poo. Like, and it was my placenta.
Yeah.
So yeah, after that I think, I just gave Bub over to Dad, and I went and had a shower, and my birth keeper made me like a rice pudding, and gave me some more tinctures and stuff like that. And then within 2 hours, my daughter came home as well.
Yeah.
She was like packed and ready for her first ever sleepover.
Yeah.
And then like 2 hours later, we're like, can we have her back?
Yeah.
Like we've got a baby now. And she came in and met him, and then within 2 hours I was in bed with Bub and going to bed for the night.
Whoa.
That was the birth.
Just
in
another
a nutshell.
day. Just
another day.
Wow.
Started the day just normal, playing with my daughter, and then that night had a baby in bed.
Yeah. Such a special but non-event. Just
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I have had a pretty eventful postpartum though.
Okay.
Which amazing birth, pretty eventful postpartum, which in hindsight, so grateful that I prepped in terms of like meals and having a meal train. And I think like no matter where you're choosing to birth, you need to prep for postpartum like you're going to have a cesarean. I think that's the best advice. Like you just never know what's going to happen. And, my husband was really lucky. He had 8 weeks off. Yeah. So my first month was literally just resting.
Yeah, wow.
Which was incredible. And we pretty much had a full month of meals dropped to us.
Yeah.
So, like, we're only just starting to cook now, and, like, he's doing all the cooking. Yeah. So it's been amazing. But pretty much day 2, I had no pain. I had, like, no burning when I weed or anything. But I was like, I should probably just check my, like, perineum just to make sure I haven't tore or anything.
Yeah.
I had a secondary tear with Lakai, and I just let that heal naturally, and that healed really well.
Yeah.
And I checked, and I was like, that's the other thing, especially if you're free birthing, get familiar with your vagina before you give birth. Because I was like, I actually haven't like checked it out since before I had babies. Like if I'm honest, I haven't actually sat with a light and looked at it.
So true. Oh my gosh, this might be revolutionary, Mel.
Is this the bit you're going to sniff it?
Yes. Everybody, go and analyze your vaginas.
Go and check your vagina.
Yeah. Get to know your vagina.
Only because I was like looking, and I'm like, I don't know if that's just my vagina because it's swollen because I've just given birth, or like, do I have a tear? And then I started noticing like this little sort of tear down my perineum. But every time I look at it, it looked different. Okay. Like one time it looked like not that big of a tear, and then I checked like a couple of hours later and it looked bigger. So I was like, oh, and I kept thinking like, at the end, I was thinking, I think this might be something more than I'm comfortable with managing at home.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
I just had a feeling that, like, I could see it down towards, like, my anus. So I was like, that's not something I've experienced before.
Yeah.
And I knew that if I was to go get, like, sutured or anything like that, there's sort of a time limit on how far after birth that's really effective. Yeah. So I was like really stressed and really having like this push and pull, like, do I want to go to a hospital? I ended up deciding to go get assessed. Yeah. And really I just didn't want to leave my bubble. Like, I didn't want to leave my baby. I didn't want to take him in.
Yep.
So I had my husband just like in the car with the kids, and I went into maternity and had to explain
wow.
my situation. And it was a really interesting perspective, because they were obviously, some of them were quite good, but I knew that they were judging my choices. But, you know, when I was in the maternity unit, I was seeing some things that were far beyond physiology. Like, I wasn't hearing physiological birth. I think I was there for 6 hours altogether, and it was just women getting wheeled to surgery.
Yeah, wow.
That's like, you could not hear, and you could not hear one woman like roaring or in full labor. The whole maternity ward was full, but you couldn't actually hear like what I've experienced labor to be.
Wow.
And it was just, women literally getting wheeled, OBs running, women getting wheeled down to theatre.
Wow.
It was a really interesting experience.
Yeah. Did anybody say any like backhanded weird comments, or? The thing was, they were really short staffed, so I kept having midwives like come in, and that they'd have to run off, or there was one OB. I think there was like 2 OBs on, but there was one OB that kept coming into me and then having to run off again. Yeah.
And it was like every person I met, I explained my situation. And when I was in the room, I heard the OB telling another new midwife what my situation was.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard her say, "I just don't get that." Like, after she said that I birthed at home with no midwife, etc. And then that same midwife had to come into the room and start talking to me, and I'm like, ugh. They were quite good, to be honest. Like, they were asking questions around Barb, like, oh, like, was it your first or second? And, oh, like, was your birth good? And I was like, yeah, perfect birth.
Yeah.
So I asked to get assessed, and I had a midwife finally be able to assess me. And this is actually what really like effed me up. She was like, I'd obviously done like research before I went in around like what a 3rd or a 4th degree tear looked like. And even on like the freebirth page, it's like, if you need to get these like attended to, because if you don't, they can have like pretty full on consequences down the track. So I sort of had an idea about what each degree looked like. And then I had a midwife check me over, and she was like, yep. Look, I think you've just got a really clean tear. We probably wouldn't suture it. It looks really clean. You're probably good to go. I'll just go check it with the doctor. And so I'm like, yep, cool. All right. Like, I'm leaving, got my everything together. And then the OB finally came back like half an hour later and said, oh, no, I need to assess you. And they did. And they were like, look, it's a 3rd degree tear. You'll need to go straight to theatre. And it was like, the anxiety that came over me.
Because you're by yourself for this too.
Yeah. I felt sick to my stomach. And I have a huge fear of hospitals. I have a huge fear of needles. I have to go to the dentist. I don't get the numbing needle. Like, I just get the work done. Yeah. So I straight up was like, no. I just straight up said no, and they were like, what? And as soon as she said that, the OB got rushed to an emergency, and she was like, sorry, I have to go. I can't answer your questions. And so I think I sat there for a few hours like, hello, like, can someone come and answer the questions I have? And I finally was able to chat to her again. She just kept getting called off to like another emergency. Yeah. And I used like the brain method, you know, like it's like the decision-making tool in labour. I sort of used that, and I was like asking what are the other options. Like, I'm not having surgery, and I was very clear. And they pretty much made out that there was no other option. So I was like, okay, can I just get sutured up? And pretty much the response was that there's no evidence to say that would work or that would hold together. You will be incontinent. You will have issues having sex for the rest of your life. It was like so much fear mongering. And I was like, okay, I want to go and feed my baby. I need to have a break from here. So I went back to the car and I spoke to my husband, and I sat, it was like 3 or 4 a.m. at this point, and I sat on my phone and I looked at every bit of research I could, and like every bit of personal experience. And I just went back in there and said, I'm just getting sutured up and that's it. Like, I'm not going for surgery. I want you to do it right here. I asked like a list of questions before that. And they basically said, okay, but you would have to sign something to say you're going against medical advice. And I was like, yep, cool. So I got sutured up. And that was it. And I went home, and it was so funny. I had no pain until I got the stitches, and oh my God, peeling with stitches is like next level. My experience was actually amazing because I was on bed rest, and I did a lot of things. Like, I was like putting like nori seaweed on it, and I had manuka honey, and I was doing like everything I could. I was eating like bone broth and only eating like really nutrient dense foods. I pretty much would get up to go to the toilet and shower, and that was it. Like, my husband would change baby, and I healed really well.
Because this, so remind me when this is. I like 2 or 3 days post birth.
So it would have been 2 days post birth.
And now you're 5 weeks postpartum.
Now I'm 5 weeks. I've had a checkup. It's all healed.
Amazing.
I don't have any issues. And I'm now connected with a pelvic floor physio from like 6 weeks just to do like, I suppose like preventative, like stuff with my pelvic floor. But that was my experience, which really changed my postpartum, because like, I had to go 3 days after that. One of the conditions, when I said I wanted to get sutured, was that I'd have to go back for appointments with them for monitoring to make sure it wasn't getting infected and it was properly going back together and all that jazz. But it was awful because the appointments, I've never been in a maternity unit. I didn't know how they worked, but it's like you have an appointment, but you still go there and you wait like 6 hours. So I went there, and I'm like watching all these women waiting for just like their normal appointments. And they're just waiting and waiting and waiting. And I'm like, what the hell? Like, it was just such a weird, I just wanted to be in bed. And so I was like curled up on like a chair in the fetal position. And I didn't go back after that. Like, once I got that check, I didn't go back. So
well, they can say all they want, but like you're not their hostage.
I know, right?
Oh my gosh! Wow.
And I think like I don't want like my experience to deter people from getting help if they have a serious tear. Like, I think it's something you really need to lean in yourself. There's also with a 3rd degree tear, there's like a 3A, a 3B, a 3C, and she pretty much said mine was like just a 3A. When I weighed up my options, I was like, I'm not going for surgery for that. And if for some reason down the track I had issues that had stemmed from it, I would look at surgery then, like not when I have a newborn. Like, it just wasn't on my radar at all. So like birth was amazing, but I'm really proud that I suppose I utilized the system when I felt like I needed it. And I had to sort of advocate for myself in a way. But don't be afraid to anyone like listening out there if you feel like it's something that you need to get assessed or, you know, you need to seek medical. It doesn't ever take away from the birth that you've had. So I think that's important.
Whoa. Wow, that's so powerful, Mel. Like, I'm so jealous. Not that I don't love my own experiences, but I'm just like, oh my gosh. That's so joyful. I love birth stories. And like, go you. Like, absolutely. Like, the system is there for a reason. you know, you trusted yourself and, you know, made an informed decision. I mean, somewhat crazily, you know, by the research that you did yourself, because like none of them clearly had time to sit down with you and like tell you X, Y, Z. They just gave some blanket statement about there's no evidence. Well,
Yeah.
have you looked at the evidence? When's the last time you looked? Like,
that is such a good point. Well, actually, what I was finding was that, you know, she said to me, every 100% of people that give birth in a hospital get the surgery. Like, the only people that don't get it are people that birth outside of the hospital.
Yeah.
And so when I'm looking at all these experiences online and people that are talking about incontinence and they're talking about severe issues they've had and their sutures opening up and not being able to sit 6 months postpartum, these are all people that have had the repair surgery.
Yeah.
So I'm looking, and I think one of the statistics was like 25% of women that have it actually have long-term issues.
Wow.
So I'm thinking like, okay, like I'm weighing up in my head going, you know, I don't actually think that that's the best option for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, yeah, like you determine your own risk. And
yeah, exactly.
by telling someone, you know, almost a lie, like there is no evidence or there's not good evidence, like whatever, that's like a very blanket statement, and they're making this decision for you essentially because they're trying to push you into choosing this thing that makes them feel safe, but it doesn't make you feel safe. So like, go you, kick ass, like amazing. And yeah, I've loved watching on TikTok and Instagram the bits that you've shared of this whole journey, and I'm so grateful that you're sharing again on the podcast. And
I know.
Yeah, like I feel like, obviously I'm not a midwife, but I feel like, you know, when midwives have, you know, support a woman with a birth, and then a couple of years later they also support a woman, like that same woman with the birth, I feel like that's like the continuity. I feel like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have all of these guests now that have other next babies. I'm just going to be, you know, there'll be no new women, just new babies.
I'm like that on the Empowered Birthers. Like when I'll have people like the night they give birth, be like, do you want another birth story?
Yeah, I have people message me like, I had my baby yesterday. I'm like, oh my gosh.
Love that. How good is it though that like women are they're so thrilled about their birth that they can't wait to share. Yeah. Like it's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, if you love this episode, listeners, as much as I have, make sure you let me know. I love like hearing about it. And did you have anything else that you've just remembered or like want to say, Mel?
I had actually had a thought last night around like, I think I was looking at past posts, and I remember in my first birth, like actually feeling like I was going to die. Yeah. But like, I remember making a post about it saying like, in labor, you might actually feel that you're going to die. That means you're like nearly there. Yeah. I didn't have that. Like I didn't have any sense of losing control. Yeah. Like it was just fully in control the whole time of that birth, which is, I don't know if it's like women that free birth or like people that have had multiple babies, if you just get more like familiar with the sensations. Yeah. But it was just such an incredible, like I'm still on a birth high like 5 weeks later. Like completely on oxytocin high still. Yeah.
Well, like that's what you planned for, and you know, if you plan like in a way that you know, if you plan for postpartum, like you've had a C-section, and if you plan your birth and not plan your birth, but you know, think about your dream birth and make steps to try and achieve that, then like, I mean, this could be you too, listeners. Thank you so much.